The achievement in Buddhist studies by Venerable Rung Ruang Pa Pa Saro, Dr. Rung Ruang Lim Chu Patipa. All beings are struggling to have good life and happiness in the world. Living in the world of uncertainty, we unavoidably encounter with so many things in the world. Some are satisfied and beneficial to life, but some are unsatisfied and harmful to life. We all are under the law of nature, that is, thing is happening due to certain cause and effect in nature, not by anyone wishes. Therefore, the only way that we can do, is to study the truths of nature, and then manage to use this knowledge to serve for the benefit of life development. The Buddha made use of the special condition of mind with mindful and clear comprehending to study the truths of life within nature, so-called, the enlightenment. Since the external world is uncontrollable, therefore the Buddhist strategy is to study on the mind internally causing suffering to life. And if we can manage the mind rightly, surprising the suffering can be substantially reduced, so-called, the liberation. The Buddha discovered that if the mind was directed by uninstructed cognition to assume the craving for existence for self, with desire and lust, the whole mind processing would be dominated by the five aggregates subject to clinging on self with desire and lust. This was a fundamental problem that led to the unwholesome mind with greed, hatred, and delusion, and finally led to all kind of evil doing and suffering to life. In principle, the Buddhism is intended to resolve this suffering in life by searching for the truths of life within nature, Dharma. The Buddha developed the threefold study strategy to be incorporated in the Buddhist practice by performing insight observation to gain wisdom, and then utilize this wisdom to make an end of suffering in life. And the extraordinary practice is called the practice of the footprint of the Buddha, by establishing mindfulness to perform the insight observation to see what is happening during the changing of the objects of consciousness in conjunction with the five aggregates of being, namely form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness in a stream of consciousness that reflects on how life functions to respond to the world. The technique on how the Buddha performed the insight study is very remarkable, which can be highlighted as follows. Considering life as a stream of consciousness, and each time that there is a conscious, there will be an associated state of mind as well. Therefore, if we can observe the changing associated state of mind in terms of the object of consciousness with respect to form, feeling, perception, and volitional formations, along with the stream of consciousness, then we can indirectly study the nature of life. In addition, the Buddha discovered that life inherited a special quality of the element of acknowledgement to be aware of what was happening in the world. And for human being, we had the sixth sense basis to receive stimuli from the world. The quality of acknowledgement directly related to the mindfulness development, and by establishing the mindfulness to abandon all the unwholesome thoughts of the five lower fetter, the mind could be internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated with clear mindful to perform insight observation to see the Dharma of what was happening inside the mind as follows.
I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. I entered and dwelled in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thought and examination, with rapture and happiness born of seclusion.
And after the purified mindfulness was developed, then applied this purified mindfulness to see what was happening inside the mind when having a stream of consciousness. Then we could realize the mechanism of how life functions in receiving information from the world through the sixth sense basis, that the consciousness would fetch stimulus from the world one at a time, then absorb such informative stimulus by feeling immediately. The feeling with the craving for existence would drive the mind processing in selecting the choice of action in responding to the world. Typically, the stimulus from the world will activate the decision process of mind processing in terms of the reflections in the five aggregates of being, namely form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. As the object of consciousness will arise and fade away quickly, then we can realize that the object of consciousness and everything in associated with it are impermanent, deteriorating, and no self. As a result, the associated form, feeling, perception, volitional formation, and consciousness are impermanent, deteriorating, and no self, as well. In fact, the arising of each mental phenomenon within the mind depends on the occurrence of previous mental phenomenon in terms of mind processing, so-called the process of dependent origination. The Buddha called the process of dependent origination as the operating system that drove how a being lived in the world in the circle of life after life, And if we can correct the problems arising in this process of dependent origination, then we can resolve all suffering in life as well. The insight discovery of the process of dependent origination is the greatest knowledge of mankind, because by having a good understanding of the process of dependent origination on how do we build up an island of self, myself, mind to serve the individual need, which turn out to be the root cause of all kinds of mental problem or defilement inside the mind that leads to the decision in demanding to satisfy this self by taking evil actions with greed, hatred, and delusion in responding to the world. And after understanding the origin of problems, then we will be able to develop proper strategy and actions to resolve these arising problems inside the mind rightly. Apparently, the knowledge gained from this mind study leads to the wisdom that life is no self. Then the mind will abandon the craving of existence, and then the craving with desire and lust will be destructed, and as a result the mind will be purified and liberated from all kinds of suffering in life. And when saying the word, no self, it should be emphasized that it is not just the kind of belief in such a wording, but it is the real experience with clear understanding of the reality on how the mind is processing in nature that there is no self at all, and then make use of this knowledge to guide the mind to destruct desire and lust, and then to guide the mind process into the right pathway, as it really should be in the noble eightfold paths. This destruction of defilements with desire and lust due to the craving for existence of self during the mind processing within the process of dependent origination can be accomplished in conjunction of the Four Noble Part analysis as follows. Firstly, it is necessary to be mindful and to see the insight of mind processing due to the information of individuality. The stream of consciousness is dependently caused by an individual cause and effect reflected by the process of dependent origination. This is to conclude that life is a natural process, and not to be controlled by the self of any kind. Secondly, by experiencing the process of dependent origination, then we understand that because of having the assumption of self to absorb in response to feeling, then arises the craving for existence, and then no matter what kind of feeling it may be, either happy or painful, then arises the craving for sensual pleasure or the craving for extermination. These craving drive the desire and lust which will dominate the whole mind processing with the five aggregates subject to clinging. This is the driving force that arises the dependent states of mind in the process of dependent origination. Thirdly, once having a good understanding on the root cause of problem arises inside the process of dependent origination, then clearly there are three possible ways to resolve the problem within the process of dependent origination, that is, the destruction of craving for existence of self by containing incoming stimuli from the world at the six sense bases with disenchantment, the destruction of the five aggregates subject to clinging whenever the mind is dominated by the assumption of self within the mind processing, and the destruction of ignorance so that the mind will not reconstruct a new object of consciousness to proceed into the flow of the process of dependent origination. Fourthly, by having the Eightfold Noble Path to guide the mind processing and life rightly, the mind is mindful in the present moment at all times to be able to respond any stimulus from the world rightly, that is, the mind is liberated from all kinds of the object of consciousness, and this is the Buddhist way to make an end of suffering in life by wisdom. The Buddha enlightenment is the greatest discovery of the truths of life within nature. It is not any miracle at all. From Buddhist perspective, life is something that already exists as element in nature, and the fact that life is a natural process on how an individual will receive information from environment, and then responds to the world in such a unique way of cause and effect, so-called the law of cause and effect, by the karma of the information of individuality, so-called the law of karma. The early Buddhism is based on facts and science. It is a universal knowledge for everyone, not limited to the Buddhists only, and the Buddha explained that as long as there are people still study on these subjects, that is, the concept of nature in element, the six sense bases of how life interfacing with the world, and the process of dependent of origination as an operating system of life, then these knowledge of Buddhism and Buddhism will last forever. The Buddhist studies are fundamentally focused on these life studies. The Buddhism is not concerned about gods, having any conferences with spirits or gods, getting blessing from gods, or even to be an angel. The heartwood of Buddhism is the study on the truths of life within nature, and then makes use of this knowledge to make an end of suffering in life. In addition, the Buddha also is not worried about how long the Buddhism will last, because as long as people still make study and searching for the truths of life within nature, then there will be a chance that they will discover the truths, and as a result this Buddhist knowledge will be available. There will be people who reaches the ultimate goal of Buddhism, to live in the world of reality with wisdom, and to make an end of suffering in life. And no matter there is a Buddhism or not, the world is the world, and all beings are still living in a circle of life under the law of nature. The purpose of Buddhism is to share the Buddha's knowledge that he earned on the day of his enlightenment to public, and those who can understand this knowledge, then this knowledge will be beneficial and relevant to the fundamentals of spiritual life. This is the direct knowledge for enlightenment leading to the success in disenchantment, purification, liberation, and this is a way to the Nibbana. And from the religion perspective, the Buddhism is a breakthrough discovery in searching for the meaning of life based on facts and science, so-called enlightenment. This is the universal knowledge for mankind, not specifically to Buddhists only. The Dharma of the Buddha's teachings are timeless, that is, the truths during the Buddha time period, they are still the truths as of nowadays, and this knowledge is open to everyone for an investigation and experimentation to have a good understanding and confidence in Buddhism. The origin of Buddhism started when the Buddha searching for the meaning of life while the world was covered with the darkness of delusion with tremendous supernatural beliefs. However, the Buddha made use of mindfulness to study on life to gain the knowledge on the truths of life within nature, and this the knowledge that will bring peace to mankind and the world.